Hey everyone, Typical Hunks Adventure here. Trying something different in terms of not holding the phone, just because it's kind of awkward at times holding it up, as I'm just kind of in my car. I had bought a tripod type thing with a suction that you could try in the car as well as hooking up to a vent, but apparently the vents in my car are just too deep, so it can't actually connect to it, so I'll have to try using the suction cup at another time. But yeah, beautiful day. Just rained a little bit, and it's very sunny, so it's kind of a cool contrast of it being nice and sunny, but you have the moisture on the ground. I was actually planning on aerating today my backyard, which I've never done before, but I bought a tool for that to try out. So I guess a little bit of the rain will help, and then hopefully we get some more rain, so it's able to get into some of the deeper compacted ground in my backyard. But yeah, today I wanted to talk about my childhood, specifically my childhood home. It kind of came to mind last night while I was thinking of things and decided to start jotting down notes, things that I remembered about it that I'd like to talk in a video. So I do have some of those notes over here on the side, so if you see me glance over, depending on how I edit those out, that is what I'm looking over at, but do my best to just kind of talk from memory as well. So growing up, we grew up in a rough neighborhood. There were a lot of drug deals and shootings and things that went on. Luckily, none of that affected me in any way in terms of that. But outside of that, we stayed in that house until I was 18 and graduated high school. And then my parents unfortunately filed for bankruptcy, and we sold the house and moved into another place that we ended up renting. But before all that, the house I grew up in was pretty big. Yeah, we never used the front door to the house. We always used the side door, which we went up the long 3-car driveway to get to. The door that we used was actually an older door that took a skeleton key, which was kind of neat. Speaking of keys, actually, I remember my dad, he always had this massive keychain of just so many keys. We're talking hundreds. And I don't even know what they all went to. I feel like he just kind of collected them. He was a store manager and ran a truck stop for a while, so I'm sure there were a lot of keys that went to certain things, at his employer. And then he also had a key to the gym, because he liked to work out at a gym. And then, some of the keys for the house and stuff like that. But yeah, even then, I still don't know what probably 90% of his keys, went to in terms of that. But so getting inside of that door led to kind of like our entry area. So the house was split up into 2 floors. The main floor had a door that went into our house, and then you could take a long stairway up that went to the top of the house, I guess. It was probably one house at one point in time, maybe, I don't know, but in this case it was kind of separated. You could think of it as like a duplex, and then we had a door to the basement as well in that entry area. So going in to the front door to where I lived, we had our kitchen. I can remember all sorts of things. We had a separate freezer and then a fridge, because my parents loved to cook, and working at a truck stop and a restaurant, they were also able to get deals on a lot of food, things like that. I can actually recall going to food shows, as weird as that is to say. We would go to food shows where different distributors would have like new foods and things that they'd be trying out for restaurants and other places that would serve food, in this case like the truck stop. And yeah, that was really neat. You just go around, try samples of things. Can't believe I never remember that until now. So yeah, that was really cool. There was a place called Curtsy, and across from them they have this giant field of just wildflowers, and we used to go there and just pick some and bring them home for like our garden in the backyard. But yeah, that was something. So you don't know too many people with a separate fridge and a freezer. And our fridge had a freezer as well. But even now I do have a chest freezer that I use. So we had shelving in that kitchen. I remember glass grapes. Occasionally you see those around, but I remember we had those. We had a parrot that my grandma had given us. It was some like exotic, I don't remember, green parrot with like a yellow stripe on its back. Her name was Lolita. And a newspaper that we kind of had over on the stove, because my mom on the side cooked really big egg rolls, and she would do pizza rolls and things. We're talking like the size of like a Pepsi can, not just like the little dinky egg rolls or spring rolls you see nowadays in like Asian restaurants. And yeah, she would always cook those, and we didn't have a deep fryer, so we would use the deep skillets and just have them full of oil, and she would cook, there. She would also make other things like chicken wings, and to avoid a lot of the oil splatter, she would, kind of have that stuff set up around the stove. Although it seems like kind of like a fire hazard now, just having, things like newspaper like that so close to probably open flames. Yeah, then we had a washer, and we would actually have the dish rack and everything on top of the washer, which I feel like we had to have moved, but maybe not, because I think I remember the washer would run and the dish rack would shake a little as it would move. So we had that going on. I remember the little push light, so you'd push up to turn the light on. We had that right above the sink in the kitchen. And then right around that was a little pantry where we'd have a giant bag of rice, and then just some foods, but we never had a dryer. And so in that kitchen we had floor vents in the house for heat, so we had these little clothing racks that my mom would have up just on top of the heater to dry a lot of the clothes. Now of course that was more so for smaller things, or something we didn't want to take outside, or just in the winter. So in the summertime, or when it was a bit warmer outside, we did have clothing lines that ran in a certain part of the backyard, and that's where we dried a majority of the clothes that we had. Going from the kitchen into the living room, we had a big sectional type couch that was more shaped like this, kind of like the Eve of house. And that took up the majority of the living room. We had some big speakers out there, because my dad always liked to play music, and spent a lot of time in that living room just because that's where we had our TV, where we would do gaming and things like that. Or if I had friends over, we'd play video games, things along that line, especially with a modded PS1 until the PS2 came out, and spent many a time playing games in there, especially things that I'd loved like Final Fantasy X, and even before that. I remember playing, it was either Gran Turismo 1 or 2, and finishing a long endurance race and having the power blip for a second while I was mid-save, and it had corrupted my file data, so that was no fun. But yeah, I do remember that in the living room we had these two really tall, probably 8-foot tall bookshelves that just went in the corner, and I remember climbing up those because my parents would hide things at the top, or I'd find a penny or something up there. But I remember always climbing up those. And attached to that living room, we had our bathroom, as well as my bedroom that I shared with my brother. All the doors for the rooms in this house kind of had the folding doors that you would see for a closet. So it was kind of interesting because sometimes they'd pop off the hinge, or they wouldn't shut right. That was always odd, especially if you're trying to use the bathroom. But yeah, I remember everything going on in those rooms. And with our bedroom, the bunk bed that we had took up so much space, and it was so close to the ceiling because the roof, or the ceilings weren't very high in the house. And I remember playing Pokemon on a Game Boy, and we had the styrofoam type roof panels, or ceiling panels, and I remember we had a hole in one. I remember a centipede had come through, and that scared me, and I had to tape that up. The light in that room was up high. Again, it was one where you'd have to twist it to turn it off, and yeah, it was such an interesting setup because we had a dresser, and you still couldn't reach the light, so you'd have to hop up on the dresser or lean up on it to twist the light off until we got older. And then we also had a shelf, or kind of I guess it was kind of a shelf on top of the dresser, and it was just the right height that it cleared getting under that light, but it made it harder because then you're trying to get your arm flush with that and then twist to turn out the light. So that was always fun. And then going on from the living room, it went into our dining area, I guess. And my grandma had given us this giant conference room, boardroom type table that could probably see 16 people or something. So we had that in there, and that's where my dad had his TV and everything like that. And I remember some other things we had. He had his music set up in there. We had the a giant CD player type station thing, as well as the radio and everything hooked up to that. And we had the Tasmanian Devil light hooked up in there. I always remember looking at that. And we had a clock. It's kind of an animated waterfall clock, which was kind of neat. It was hexagon shaped and it lit up, and it just had an ever-flowing waterfall type animation as it went. And then in that dining room, it went out to the front door of the house, which we always kept locked and kind of covered. And then we had an off-piece door from there that's probably like a coat closet or something that my dad used for some of his clothes, as well as like cards he collected, mainly sports cards and superhero cards from like Marvel and stuff like that. So he had a lot of that in there. And I remember going in there and drawing like phallic shapes and stuff on the wall, and him getting mad once. And there's also a memory of like in the yard where they had bought me one of those gold-paged gilded Disney books, and it was huge, and for whatever reason I decided to throw it into like a mini little water pool that we had. He wasn't happy about that. Sorry, that was kind of a tangent there, but off from the dining room we had my mom's room, a very tiny room. I remember it was her bed, she had her dresser, and then this giant mirror that was attached to the dresser. It probably weighed a ton. And then all of her jewelry and stuff. It was like a very big built-in dresser that kind of had all that stuff in there. And then her little closet. I remember being in there all the time because I slept in my mom's room with her until probably middle school, because my dad always just slept on the floor or on the couch, for whatever reason. I have other family members as well, like an uncle and a great uncle and stuff. They all slept on couches or chairs for whatever reason. Hopefully I'm not, destined to that same fate. But even in that area where my dad would sleep, and I think about it, in that dining room, we had a built-in bookcase that wrapped all the way around the room on one side, and that was always cool. My dad had a lot of books, and I remember climbing that as well, just because it was kind of neat to climb up that. Other things in my mom's room. I remember watching, certain shows like Barbed Wire that featured Pamela Anderson. There's, Ken Sorbo and Hercules, Xena, the Warrior Princess. I remember when we had an alarm system set up on our house for security, that it was set up in my mom's room, and it would trigger by motion, and sometimes it would trigger even walking by the room outside the house, or as soon as we got in the front door of the house. I actually don't know where the sensor was for it, but I just remember it was always so stressful. I'd get home from school and it was like a race, because I would need to use the skeleton key to get into my front door, and then use the actual house keys to unlock and get into my house. I think we actually had 2 keys to the door into our main level. And then I would have to sprint all the way through the kitchen, the living room, the dining room, and then into my mom's room at the end of the house, just to enter a code to disarm the system. And it was always so hectic. And I remember one time I didn't make it in time, and it went off, and I think the police or something showed up, and I just said, I didn't make it in time to disable that. That was never fun. But coming all the way back up throughout the house, back to the kitchen, we did have a sunroom that was attached to that. That outlooked to the backyard. We always just kind of had storage and stuff in there. And actually it did have a doorway that led out that was adjacent to where our side door was to the house, but I don't think we ever used that. Maybe once, and it probably was when we were moving out that we actually used that door. And some other things about that downstairs. I remember it shifted, a bit while I was younger. The dining room used to be a gym, because my dad's big on weightlifting and stuff like that, so we used to have gym equipment and things in that dining room, and we used the living room more as where he would watch things on TV and listen to music and stuff along those lines. And I'll never forget sleeping on the couch for a while when I wouldn't sleep in my in the bunk bed. I don't know why I wouldn't sleep in the bunk bed. Maybe it was the centipede thing that freaked me out for a while. Maybe it was when my brother had a girlfriend and she would stay over, so it just felt awkward, so I just ended up started sleeping on the couch. But my dad, he would always play this weird Halloween soundtrack disc, and it would, have goblins munching on things, or weird creepy things like witches cackling and stuff, and people screaming or being tortured or whatever. And it was always so strange. I remember it made it so hard for me to sleep. I would try and listen and drown it out with headphones or just cover my ears to fall asleep. even to the point of I remember like taking a key and just trying to scratch the disc to make it not work anymore because I wasn't a fan of it. And so coming back out to the entryway, instead of going into the area where I lived, if we were to go up the stairs, it would get us to the upstairs unit. And even before that, just those stairs, I remember being a kid one time and we were waiting for my uncle to get the door open while we were bringing groceries up, and I fell backwards down them. They're pretty steep stairs that go all the way up, and luckily I didn't get hurt or anything, but yeah, I remember that. And I also remember, as I got older in my teens, trying to jump from the highest step possible, trying to set new records there. Just thinking about it now, it makes my knees want to pop just thinking about jumping from that high. But the upstairs had a slightly different layout in terms of how it was set. So you would come in and you'd be at the living room, and to your left was a kitchen. I remember it had a long wraparound bathroom to get to the toilet and everything like that, so it was always an interesting layout there. But yeah, in the living room we also had a giant furnace system. I remember there being a giant air vent that went to like a chimney. And we had a bedroom there. That's my cousin's room. My uncle lived upstairs for most of the time that I grew up in that house. And then instead of using it as like a dining room, the end room, my uncle made his master bedroom, just all open concept, and everything was bed and TV and stuff like that. And then the room attached to that was small, and he kind of just made that like an office room where we just had whatever in there. I actually remember he would have sugar cubes, and I would steal them out of his pantry and run and hide in that room and eat them. As the years went by, I remember he got a computer, and my cousin would use it and be in the AOL chat rooms and things like that. I never had a computer growing up for a while. I think it was years later that I ended up getting one, and we didn't have much on it. We didn't have internet or anything like that. We didn't even know how to use the AOL discs back when they would just hand those out everywhere or send them in the mail. But yeah, I do remember having a computer, and we would just play pinball on it or solitaire, or I would just browse every possible file I could find on the computer to try and find something cool or exciting on there. I remember finding a keyboard on there and making music with it, so that was neat. And I remember my dad buying a PC game. It was like a drag racing game, and we tried to get it to work on there, and it never did. And I think even after buying like a new laptop or something, I think it was like my first laptop that I got when I was starting college, or getting ready to start college, because I was still in high school. I couldn't even get to work on there, but I had crappy Windows Vista, so it's not too surprising, honestly. But yeah, that was kind of the upstairs. And from the kitchen, there was a window that looked out into our backyard, that you could actually open that window and go out, and you'd be on top of the sunroom's roof, so it was kind of neat. Sometimes we'd hang out just on top of that landing. And another thing to note with the upstairs, I remember my uncle, he always had a window AC unit, or maybe two of them even, in his master room. And growing up, that was just something we never had. We never had AC in my downstairs unit, or even at the other houses that my parents and we had moved to and around to. And yeah, it was just something we never had. We just always dealt with, miserable nights in the summer, having fans on, or just having the windows open, hoping for some sort of, cool night breeze. And onto the backyard. So continuing up that long driveway, if you were to continue, we did have a big barn, or garage, and then it went into our backyard. So the barn had my dad's Dodge Challenger in it, and then we had an upstairs that we would hang out in. Honestly, I don't remember what we did in there other than just kind of hang out. Maybe we listen to music or something. Maybe we had a bench in there to lift weights. I don't remember, but in the backyard we had a giant rose bush that actually was like right up near the door, so it was always kind of a pain to try and avoid that while you're going in the door to go up. And that kind of expanded along a flower bed along that barn, and we also had rose bushes that continued along there, and some wild garlic. And right past the barn in the back of it was like an area where we had the clothesline run, and we'd have our clothes hang there to dry off without it being in view of anyone. And at the back of that side of the backyard, we had our fence and like really tall ivory they're not ivory, just ivy type bushes and stuff. So that actually helped cover a lot of the area. So that also gave us more privacy along those lines. And yeah, I remember a lot of bushes. My mom had these flowers with giant bulbs on them on these bushes, and I would only pull them off. I never really understood why I did that, but I'm sure she was never happy when I would do that. And then we were privileged to have a side lot. So one nice thing was we had our house with the backyard, but then we also owned the land next to our house. So we also had essentially 3 backyards. So it was a really big yard. I remember we had like an orange honeysuckle tree, we had plum trees, we had a lot of snowball trees, which were really cool. We had one on upside the house, and I remember we'd like climb up it and hide in there. Made hide and seek really fun as well. We had a patch for strawberries with our shared neighbor on that side of the yard. We had like raspberry and blackberry bushes and things like that, and little pathways that you could take that went under snowball trees. And it was really neat. And then an island where we had like a bush. Like I say island, just like like a giant bush in the yard with some like soil around it where we had plants and things like that. And we had like giant fossil rocks that I remember we had like found and we decided to put there. And you'd always see hummingbirds coming around the yard. But yeah, it was a really big yard. It was so fun. I remember you could like punt a football from one corner to the other and it would be fine. And yeah, that was just, had a lot of fun there. I remember riding bikes around in there, and it was kind of an interesting setup because on that side lot you could, we had really tall hedges that kind of also gave us privacy along that. But the across the street houses were 2-story and they had balconies, and I remember people would just sit out on those upper balconies and look out, and they probably looked over into the yard and could see me play. And I think about that now, it probably reminds me of like those views you see that look down at like Central Park in New York City. And yeah, it was always an interesting thing. That yard was just so big. We would always play around in and do things in, and shoot fireworks off and camp in that yard. And as we got older, we didn't do as much in the yard. It focused more on the upstairs. My uncle had moved out. We had converted the upstairs basically into a gym since my dad was so big in the gym. So one of the bedrooms we'd have a bench in, and then we had like leg machines and pull down machines and like squats and squat racks and stuff like that. In one of the rooms, and in the master room we had one that was like all-in-one bench machines that also had a pull-up bar, and then 2 lat pull-downs on the side. Some other thoughts with the yard. I remember it was kind of separated for that side lot where we had like really tall pine trees that kind of went along, and yeah, sometimes I'd punt that football and I remember they get stuck in that tree and just be gone. And even thinking about that roof landing on top of the sunroom, we never did jump off of it. We never really had a pole or anything growing up, so it's just kind of surprising that we never did try and set up something to jump off of that into there. And in that entryway going into the house after using the skeleton key, I remember we always had this window. It was like very square shaped and it was very high. I think maybe like 5 feet tall. So most of my childhood I would have to like reach up to look out of it, or our cats would have to jump up and they would get their front paws onto it and then have to scratch up with their hind legs. So I remember all the scratches going on there. But they would look out there and we'd jump up to look out into the backyard. And my dad always had this giant Halloween skeleton figure wearing a Steelers jersey that we just kept up year round in that entryway in front of the basement, things like that. But yeah, leaving the house and going back down the driveway, we always had this like weird block shaped thing. Kind of reminded me of like a microwave or something a little bit bigger, but we'd stand on it or sit on it, and it was right next to the chimney stack. And I think it had a door on it. I don't know if we ever opened it or like what it had in it, but I do remember that. And, looking across from that over to our other neighbors, I remember I didn't realize this until the day we moved, but they had sumac, but I always just thought like poison sumac was the only sumac until I had to touch it or rubbed up against me while I was trying to load something in. And then realizing that there's non-poisonous sumac. So that was always something that I never realized until after I got older. But yeah, just so many memories at that house. Super Bowl parties, WWE pay-per-view events, New Year's Eve parties, tattoo parties. My family just always had family and friends over all the time. Always had music playing. And actually just last night I had a dream that somehow I ended up at the house. Maybe it's because I was writing these notes and everything. But I ended up at the house. I remember getting out. First thing I did was take a picture of those front hedges because I was like, oh, I could use that in this, like a video that I'm gonna make about this. And I look across the street and I see the 2-story house, but the balconies are all gone. I was like, oh, I should take a photo of that. And then I run up the driveway and I see the block thing that I talked about that kind of looked like a microwave, and got a photo of that. But in this case, in my dream, the blocks were on both sides. And then I took photos of the backyard and kind of looked out and saw a light in the house. So I go in, and my dad was in there, and he was shocked to see me, and I was honestly shocked to see him. But we talked for a moment, and I mentioned, I'm not sure why I'm here, but it's probably only going to be for a day. But I haven't seen him since 2012 when I moved out west. But it was nice, it was a dream, but I haven't physically seen or given him a hug in all these years. So that was nice. But I ended up waking up because I just remember thinking, why are you here? Shouldn't you be at your other house? And that caused me to wake up. But that's going to do it for this video. My son just got out of school, so I got to get him. So stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you in the next video. And I hope you enjoyed this video about my childhood and a little bit about the house I grew up in.